Well, welcome back, folks. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your attention, and thanks for hanging out with me a little bit between times. I got to meet a number of you. Hopefully, I'll get to meet a number more just in the next day or two. Thank you for liking me. Even though I'm an Ohioan originally, I'm wearing socks that are red and have a certain emblem on it. And I promised Dave I wouldn't wear anything visible, so I kept my promise. You can't see them. Yeah, that's right. Little yellow, blue going on. Yeah, very subtle theme. Go Dave. I will say I'm thankful that Michigan is looking like the rivalry game between Ohio State and Michigan is going to be a really good one this year. That's what we all want, even though we'll win. I'm just kidding. Yeah, speaking of depression, right? All right, folks, so this session really is about what I'm terming self-hate, and I'm coupling it with insecurity. So let me just kind of even orient you why this is a thing, okay? In my years of pastoral ministry, I don't think I've ever had someone approach me for help with self-hate, okay? Like, occasionally I have somebody approach me for help with an anger issue, a relational conflict, depression, anxiety. Those are what you could call like presenting issues that are commonly recognized. But self-hate is one of those things that I think is less recognized, and it operates sort of at a level of just a stream of thinking that people aren't really aware of that's going on. You hear a lot about self-hate in sort of secular resources, pop psychology stuff. It has made the news a number of times in terms of like the insecurity and self-hatred that people feel, and the various remedies that are usually offered are something therapeutic, something that sort of tries to bolster the sense of self-worth and things like that. And there's some good ideas in all that, and there's a lot of bad ideas mixed up in all that. And what I want to do, again, is try to model for you that even though you can't look up self-hate in Scripture and get your like 3 verses, Scripture is designed to be God's testimony to us of who He made us to be and how He made us to function. So anything that goes wrong in the way we function, like self-hate, can be addressed with Scripture. That's what I want us to walk through this morning. Because here's the thing. All of us know what it's like to be insecure, okay? To not like something about ourselves. And there's, just like with depression, there's varying degrees of this, okay? And maybe you can even relate to it in your own life in different seasons. There's seasons where you kind of like your opinion of yourself is you're not really bothered by it. You don't think too highly or too lowly. It's kind of not a thing. And then there may be other seasons where you're aware, boy, this particular thing about me, the way I look, my personality type, my ability to integrate socially, my earning potential, my social status, whatever it is, there's something about me I don't like to the degree that it starts to distract me. I start to obsess about it. It affects the way I feel on a daily basis. In other words, I'm more concentrated on that than I am on the other things that God maybe has called me to. So I just want to address that. In fact, that's sort of maybe our introductory scenario. You have your handout, hopefully, here. Just an introductory scenario. Again, just put some flesh on this. I'll tell you a little story from my childhood, okay, that might help make this relatable. So I went to a small Christian school that wasn't rich enough to have a football program. And so in the fall, all your homecoming games and all your like crowd pleasers was soccer, okay? Now, I was not built for soccer whatsoever, okay? Nothing about me was built for soccer. When I was in junior high, I was like that doughy kid that loves books, okay? That was just me. And yet, you have in my circles, sort of the Greek gods of autumn were the soccer team. They were all tanned and had like this flowing, beautiful blonde hair, and like they were all just amazing specimens of humanity. And everybody would come out and they would watch them and they'd cheer for them and they'd talk about them like, hey, did you see how they did this? And man, he's really fast. Or did you see his ball work skills? And just that was the chatter of the sort of cultural milieu that I found myself in. And so here I am, a kid that liked to play the French horn and read books. And it just was it was a situation where like there was nothing appealing about me, and I knew it. And I knew it about myself. And I remember one time sort of kind of having what I think I can call now a pity party for myself, and just whining and complaining to my mom about kind of who I am. And my mom is a super sweet lady whose main mode of interacting with me is always to basically pat my hand and say, "You're the best thing ever, honey. There is no one as amazing as you are. In fact, until you came along, life in this world doesn't make sense." I'm exaggerating. The point is, she would just always affirm. And I remember being in this time of like, again, this session of self-pity, and I remember blurting out, I think for the first time, sometimes I just hate myself. And I remember the look on my mom's face was very puzzling to me because I'd actually never seen it before. I looked up at her expecting like the softness again, and then just now she's going to really pour on the affirmation. She's really going to make it seem like I'm the center of the universe. But when I looked up, her face was ticked off. She never sets her jaw. And she had her jaw set. She was mad. And she looked at me and she said, "Jeremy, you have no right." And she got up. And she walked away. I don't think that has ever happened before or since. But I offended something deep in my mom, and that was her response to me. And so what I want to illustrate to you is that I think my mom's response was illustrating some incredibly deep theology there. Okay? Theology, as you know, is the knowledge of God. And her reaction to me was based on her understanding that I am not God and therefore don't have the right to pronounce judgment and to insist on my own standards, even as I evaluate myself. And for me to make such statements when what God says about me is much different and doesn't track along those standards whatsoever, is to take matters into my own hands and be obsessed with myself in a way that does not recognize God as God. That's what her response was illustrative of. So maybe you kind of feel bad for me, but that was the best kind of response I could have received, I think. And I want to explain to you why. Now, by the way, when you have somebody struggling with self-hate, it's not the only thing you do. You have no right. And then you're like, cool, that's all the counseling I need, and you just move on. I'm not recommending that as a methodology. I'm using that as an illustration. So let's talk about these common themes in the experience of insecurity and self-hate. Again, we're following a similar trajectory as our last session. First, insecurity is the tendency to obsess about something you perceive as wrong with yourself. It involves intrusive thoughts, negative feelings, and altered behaviors, okay? So, in other words, like all the troubles of the heart, insecurity affects the entire way you see the world and relate to it. In other words, even our insecurity, it's pretty all-encompassing. So, let me give you one of my favorite examples of this, okay? I call it my awkward pants illustration, all right? You all know what it's like. Your laundry is running low, and you haven't washed things in a while, and your like go-to pants are like in the somewhere in the process of getting washed. So you go to your closet, and you reach all the way in the back, and you get a pair of pants that are like outdated by a decade and a half, okay? They don't, you're scared to even put them on because you're not sure they're going to fit, but you somehow get them on. They fit awkwardly. They're out of style. They are your awkward pants, okay? Maybe you can't relate, and everyone's like, what are you talking about, man? But the point is, you put on your awkward pants, you go to church that morning. What are you thinking about? Again, this is just an illustration, okay? Especially if the pants are uncomfortable, especially if you feel particularly unattractive in them, you walk into the auditorium, you should be preparing to worship the God of the universe collectively with your brothers and sisters in Christ. You should be thinking about, hey, that person actually asked for prayer on this situation with his boss last week. I need to go over and just say, hey, how'd it go this week? You should be thinking along those lines, but where is your thoughts more naturally drawn? I hope nobody notices my awkward pants. Or I hate how awkward I feel in my pants. And in other words, here's what I'm getting at. It's a silly illustration, but what I'm getting at is when we are obsessing about what's wrong with ourselves, according to any number of standards we'll talk about, right? In this case, like fashion standards, expectations. But when we're busy evaluating self, you're distracted from fulfilling God's calling towards others. Does that make sense? So, it affects not just, here's my point, it affects not just your thinking. In other words, your thoughts are orbiting around there. You're distracted in your thinking. It also affects your feelings, doesn't it? Okay? That kind of like, that kind of insecurity or anxiety that somebody's going to notice these things. And again, in my awkward pants example, that's a relatively, your emotions, you can get over it, right? Just get home and get your sweatpants back on. You'll be fine, okay? But if we're talking about things more like, I hate the way my face is shaped, or I've never been nearly as popular as that other person, and I'm about to go into a situation where everybody just loves him and they ignore me. Or you think, I'm about to sit in my same Sunday school group, and like all the other parents with adult children, they all have good relationships with those adult children, and my relationship with my kids stinks, and they all know it, and I hate. My point is, you all know what it is. It's your thinking. It's also the way you feel. Your feelings are distracted. And then lastly, your behaviors, your actions, the choices you make are also influenced and affected by this sort of grid of insecurity. You are less prone to lean in, aren't you? You're less prone to take actions that would be a better display of God's calling on your life, and you'd rather make decisions that isolate you, that kind of protect you from maybe somebody else noticing and evaluating you the same way that you're evaluating yourself. Okay? Or other examples, if you're insecure in sort of what people think of you, maybe other decisions you make, maybe isolation isn't the activity that you're tempted towards. Maybe it's more you're tempted to kind of like try to manipulate out of them some little nugget of affirmation, right? So you know one way we do this a lot? We say things like, "Oh, I'm the worst person ever. Oh, I'm such a bad mom. Oh, I just feel I'm just so ugly. I just don't." And then how are we positioning the other person at that point? We're positioning them to be like, "Oh no, you're not the worst mom in the world. Oh no, you're not ugly. You're so pretty. Oh no, you're just." So, by the way, I'm not saying anytime we want a compliment from someone else, we're in this like massive sin. I'm not saying that, but what I'm giving you examples of, in our insecurity, it affects the way we think, it affects the way we feel, and it affects the way we act or relate to other people. So there is sort of a comprehensive nature to this. So let's move on to the next point here. Self-hate, I think, is your heart's attempt to condemn the person you are in preference for who you wish you were. Okay? Did you get that? So there's a sense of condemnation. To condemn means to pronounce judgment, to reject. Okay? So you condemn yourself But notice the standard you're measuring yourself by to make that pronouncement is who you wish you were. So here's the thing, guys. All of us walk around, whether we recognize it or not, with some vision or ideal form of who you ought to be, who you perceive that you should be. And there's probably good things in there, like I should be more patient, I should be more Christ-like, I should give more of my time to others, right? There's probably good things mixed in there. There's probably some bad or valueless things mixed in there too. I should have more money. I should be more popular. I should be better looking according to the standards of my particular culture that go into that ideal form. Here's my point. It might be news to you that you have this, but you do. You have this form. And so all those negative thoughts and feelings about self, they're reinforced by decisions that pull away and protect yourself. They will eventually sort of harden into what I'm calling self-hate. So you can kind of think of it as insecurity is here, and as it hardens, it slides more towards what we could call self-hate. Okay? So the more I'm evaluating and judging myself and holding my ideal form of who I ought to be, and I don't measure up to that, it can harden into more self-hate. And hate means animosity, it means opposition, it means condemnation. And here's the problem. This is what I want you to get in this point specifically. Here's my main idea here. The problem with self-hate from a theological perspective, from a biblical perspective, is that condemnation is always based on a standard, and the standard that leads to self-hate is not God's standard. Okay? The standard that you're judging yourself by is not God's standard, it's yours. It's your preferences. It's your desires. It's your wishes. And so in one sense, you are saying that what you think about yourself is more important than what God thinks of you. Does that make sense? And that's actually why my mom's reaction to me, I think, was a really appropriate reaction. She was calling me out in saying, you are not in the position of God to either pronounce you innocent or condemnable. That's not what your role is. You submit your opinion and your standards of self to what God says is most valuable, to what God says is most important in the evaluation of persons. So we form our opinions of self around the desires of our hearts instead of forming it around God's desires for you. His preferences become secondary to your preferences. Let me give you an example of this, just from my counseling ministry. I once counseled a young man who was in the process of being diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. Okay, so you may have heard that terminology, you may not. It's a neurodevelopmental disorder that affects the part of the brain that God designed for us to be able to read nonverbal social cues. Okay, so this is kind of a cool little linguistics lesson. Did you know that language is not just verbal? Language is also what you do with your face, and there's certain just like there's conventions in the way we say things, like I'm speaking English to you right now, and I referred to Michigan and Ohio State, and you guys, these are familiar categories with you. Same thing with like facial expressions or bodily movements. You know, if I've got my hands in my pockets like this, you automatically think it's more casual than if I'm standing like this at attention. Just these little things that you don't even realize that you know the language, right? And most people can read. Well, somebody with Asperger's syndrome, the part of the brain that can visually recognize that and interpret it is just underdeveloped, so they don't track. And so that makes it really hard on them socially. So for instance, this young man I was counseling, I remember what made his family first pursue the diagnosis was they just noticed, like, if two people come in the room to say hi to him, so say me and Dave go in to say hello to this, we'll call this guy Mike, go in and say hi to Mike. If Mike's looking at me first, if I'm the first one to enter the room, he'll say, "Oh, hi, Jeremy, how are you doing?" And then Dave will say, "Hi, Mike." And without breaking eye contact with me, Mike says, "Oh, hi, Dave, how are you doing?" without ever looking at Dave. And again, is that a sin? No. Is that socially awkward? Yes. Does that make it hard for him to relate into his, into relationships? Yes. And so he's aware of all this stuff. He's aware of the struggle. And so he really struggled with self-hate because he knew he was different, and he didn't want to be different. He wanted to have abilities and capacities that everybody else had. And he was really deep into sort of some self-hatred. Now, let me just pause this example to just recognize this is genuine suffering on his part, okay? So I'm not just criticizing like a misplaced hope or something that he has. I just want to recognize that's a hard, very difficult situation for someone to be given, okay? But my point in this example is the way he responded to it only added to his suffering because he was measuring himself by the standard of social acceptance in his culture, and he was ignoring the deeper truths about who he is and what God says about him. Like this. God would say to him, "Mike, I do not make mistakes when I design people. And this is suffering that's unique to you, but it comes from the hand of a loving Heavenly Father. And I assure you that my use of you for my glory in my kingdom is in no way hindered, and in fact is enhanced, because this is a weakness." We went to 2 Corinthians 12 to talk about this. This is a weakness that I have chosen for you so that I might display my glory in ways through you that I can't through somebody who has more regular functioning. And guys, that might sound maybe pie in the sky to you, but as we work together and as he came to see this and believe this more deeply, his struggle with self-hatred lightened significantly because he realized my calling is not to be Mr. Social Guy that walks in a room and is the relational hub of everybody else. That's not God's calling on my life. Rather, God's calling on my life is something else. It's to display his power in my weakness, but also utilizing my strengths. And he was actually really particularly good at a certain kind of analysis that he moved towards that career-wise, and he found the way that God would be pleased to use him in his weakness. And by the way, as our church community rallied around him and loved him as who he was, it was this beautiful effect on the rest of the church of honoring the unique capacities and designs of God, and we wouldn't have had that benefit in our church had it not been for him, had it not been for that weakness. So I'm trying to show you that self-hate changes the questions we're asking about ourselves. Do I think in terms of God's desires and wishes for me, or do I think primarily in terms of my desires and wishes for myself? Okay, that leads us to our last point there on the experience of self-hate. Self-hatred is often accompanied by self-pity, which is indulging in the sorrow of your unique suffering. So I kind of gave you three terms there. We moved from insecurity, that hardens, to self-hate, and now I'm just giving you self-pity is kind of like an accompaniment often to both of those things. What is self-pity? Here's what I mean by self-pity. Self-pity is the tendency to amplify suffering by fixating on how the reality of life does not match our ideal of what it ought to be. I'll repeat that one more time. Some of you are trying to write it down. I apologize for the thickness of that. But self-pity is the tendency to amplify suffering by fixating on how the reality of my life does not match with my ideal of what it ought to be. And because, so here it is, my expectations are here, the reality only reaches here, and self-pity is me just constantly bemoaning this gap. It ought to be here, but it's actually here, and therefore life is unfair. Maybe even God's not fair, or God doesn't care, or God's irrelevant. Yeah, I hear about all this Jesus stuff and salvation from sin, but that's not going to solve my social problem. That's not going to solve my income problem. That's not going to solve whatever it is that you're insecure about yourself. That's the essence of self-pity. You are moved with pity for yourself. And in doing so, folks, I think you actually cut yourself off from, not on God's side of things, but on your side of things. You actually cut yourself off from a much better pity, from God's pity. The Bible speaks frequently of God's pity, actually. God looking at the suffering of his children and pitying them. That means being moved with compassion to do something good on their behalf. Do you think your pity can accomplish anything good on your behalf? No. It's a silly exchange. It's a very silly exchange. Because your pity, your compassion being moved for yourself towards action, you can't do anything about it. So insofar as we are self-pitying, we ignore the greater pity of God who, when we actually suffer, has us at the center of his heart. Because again, like I said in our last session, because he loves us with the same love with which he loves his son. So that's sort of the danger of self-pity. And I don't know about this, guys. Have you experienced this with your friends or family members? If somebody's kind of like self-pitying in the way they talk, what effect does it have on your relationship with them? Do you want to be around them? Maybe I'm ungodly enough to admit I don't want to be around somebody who's self-pitying, and honestly, you don't either. My point is, it has a double distancing effect, doesn't it? So I'm just trying to, again, alert us to these different aspects of this experience just so we know what we're talking about. Now let's dive into some biblical ideas that's going to help us really rethink this, all right? So relevant themes in Scripture for the experience of self-hate. I'm going to start with a basic theological point that we often miss, and I think is really important, not just for the self-hate thing, but this first point actually could be applied far more widely to some of the most crucial issues we're facing in our culture right now, like about sexual identity and identity issues and things like that. And here it is. Here's a grounding thing that you can tell your kids, that you can tell yourself, that's going to help you with everything. And that is, we were made to perceive ourselves as God perceives us. We need to go to Genesis 1 for this because I need to show you the particularities of how this falls out. Okay, go to Genesis chapter 1 with me, okay? I'm not going to pull a Ken Ham on you, okay? We're not talking about sort of creation right now. We're talking about specifically the creation of human beings. And I want to make an observation of the text that I think is actually far more important than we often give it credit for, okay? We're going to jump in and just consider three verses, verse 26, 27, and 28. As I read this little mini episode here, I want you to notice how God thinks about humanity, then he makes them, and then how he acts towards them at the very first, okay? So that's the trajectory. Verse 26 gives us a little peek into the intra-Trinitarian conversation, what he intends and purposes for man before they're created. Verse 27 is going to tell us that he actually goes and pulls a trigger, he creates them. And then verse 28 is going to be remarkable, is where I'm going to focus, okay? So verse Verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over the livestock, and over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on earth." Okay? Lock that language in your head. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. Now, here's where this is big. Verse 28. And God blessed them, and God said to them, you recognize this language? "Be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the heavens, and over every living thing that moves on earth." We can stop there. Now, did you notice the language matches from verse 26 to verse 28? Did you see that? So in other words, the purposes of God that he determined in the conversation with himself get conveyed exactly to man. So God's perspective and purposes of who man is conveyed to man after he's created. Here's my question for you. How is it conveyed? Look down at your text. Again, it's so basic you might be tempted to skip over it. But how is it conveyed? Was Adam just born pre-downloaded with a knowledge of what God's purposes for him was? Did he know in himself already God's intention from verse 26? How did God transfer that? It's so obvious. Everyone's like, should I say it? He said it. He spoke it. Folks, Adam would not have perceived himself accurately had God not spoken to him of his purposes for him. So in other words, human beings are not like your Apple iPhones that come pre-downloaded with all the software that they need. He didn't come pre-downloaded. He had to be told. He had to be instructed. And he was instructed about the center of his design. In other words, this is what God was saying to him. Okay, Adam, I'm putting you here to be my representative to do certain things. That's what he's saying to him. And Adam had to receive the words of God in order to then say, "Oh, I understand who I am and how I now ought to act in this environment that God has placed me." Guys, you're exactly the same as Adam, and so am I. You all, or in Kentucky we say y'all, okay? Y'all don't know who you are apart from what God says about you. You don't. This has been from the beginning of creation, and it is one of the most wonderful truths that we can celebrate, especially in the cultural pressures of who we are, because here's what our kids are being taught. Even if you get the sort of gender identity stuff in their specifics, even if you set it aside, the base claim is that who you are is determined by what you find within yourself, whether it's desires, whether it's urges, whether it's feelings, whether it's thoughts. Hey, you got to figure out who you are. And then there's this desperate situation where, well, who am I? Oh, well, I felt this urge. Maybe I should go that way, and maybe that's who I am. And it's this shaky, it's more like waters that are going up and down, and there's no solid ground you can place yourself on. And the good news for us is God made us to need words that are far more solid than what we find inside ourselves. And insofar as Adam operated according to what God said of him, he would healthfully function, he would righteously or rightly function in his world. And insofar as he ignored those words, everything goes wrong. That's true for you and me. You have to actively listen to what God says about you to accurately perceive yourself, to accurately see yourself. So, self-hatred means that something has gone wrong with the way we perceive ourselves. All right? So that sets us up for the next point here. You do not have the authority to condemn anyone, including yourself. Again, my mom's words were brilliant theology in that sense. She was pointing out that I'm not God, and therefore I don't have the right to condemn, nor do I have the right actually to exonerate. In one sense, humility means I shut my mouth, and I don't measure anyone else or even myself by my own standards. Instead, I allow God to do that. In fact, let me show you that this is a deeply biblical idea. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. Flip over there too. 1 Corinthians chapter 4. As you turn there, let me just set the stage so I can make a couple observations from the text. So those of you who have read your 1st and 2nd Corinthians, just in your Bible readings, or maybe you've heard sermons on it, you know that Paul's relationship with the Corinthian church was sort of an interesting and unique one compared to his relationship with the other churches. And basically what was going on was the Corinthian church was being tempted to doubt Paul's legitimacy as an apostle because of this group that we can call the super apostles. You could kind of call them the awesome apostles, the studs, the good-looking, well-spoken, highly successful apostles. And so these guys were going around basically undermining Paul's ministry by saying things like this. Dude, the guy can't even put two words eloquently together when he's with you. He writes these letters that are like so authoritative and masterful and stuff, and then when he comes, he's a stinking yahoo. Like, look at him. He's weak. We're successful. When we go to a city, look at all the people that start following us. Look how well and eloquent we are to you. On the other hand, look at Paul's resume. He keeps getting shipwrecked. You think that happens by accident? He keeps getting whipped and beaten. Is that the guy you want to follow? In other words, in our nomenclature, we could say, these awesome apostles were saying, don't follow a loser, follow winners like us. So Paul kind of addresses this reality. And his logic actually really helps us understand even the issues that we're trying to apply it to, like self-hate. Because he's going to end up saying, all right, these guys have a certain standard they're measuring me by. I could adopt that standard and measure myself by that and then be intimidated and shrink back. But I don't. I don't get to judge myself. And guess what? They don't get to judge me either. It's what God says that's most important. In fact, let's read that together. Just the first few verses of 1 Corinthians 4. We'll go that first paragraph, 1 through 5. This is how one should regard us, as servants of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it's required of stewards that they be found faithful. But with me, it's a very small thing that I should be judged by you or by any human court. In fact, I don't even judge myself. For I'm not aware of anything against myself, but I'm not thereby acquitted. It's the Lord who judges me. Therefore, do not pronounce judgment before the time, before the Lord comes, who will bring to light the things now hidden in darkness and will disclose the purposes of the heart. Then each one will receive his commendation from God. So, again, I want to be clear here, just exegetically. Paul's not talking about self-hate specifically, which is our topic this morning. But what he is doing is he's laying a deeper, larger principle of how our standards relate to God's standards in the evaluation of us that we're applying to self-hate. Does that make sense to you? And so here's what Paul is modeling for us. Look, he's saying to the Corinthians, y'all want to apply this standard of awesomeness to me, of eloquence, of earthly success. Y'all want to do that? Whatever urge I have to do it, I'm not going to do that about myself, because even if I come out on the clean end of that, even if I come out on the good end of that, it doesn't matter at all, because it's not either one of our judgments that mean a thing. It's God who judges, and he judges not according to all those stupid earthly standards, but according to that key phrase there, the purposes of the heart. God sees the heart. Am I doing it out of love for him and a desire to know him and thus fulfill what he made me to be? Is it for his glory? Am I proclaiming it for his glory? Well, that's the evaluative standard by which we should be thinking about ourselves. Not how thick our hair is. Not how expensive our car that we drive. Not how perceived successful we are in ministry or in relationships or in all the rest. Paul is modeling here. This is awesome. Paul's modeling like, I'm not going to buy this standard you're selling me. I'm not going to get lost in sort of self-commendation or condemnation on all this stuff. I'm not going to do it because that wouldn't serve you all best. That wouldn't glorify God best. The problem with self-hatred is God does not value all these things in the same way that your circles do. He doesn't measure you on the scale that you're measuring yourself. So, just a handful of examples, from my even starting with the soccer team example I gave. Hating yourself because you're not good at sports means that you're insisting that athleticism is essential to a person's value. God doesn't say that. We don't have the right to. Or hating yourself because you're not physically attractive in your own estimation means that you're insisting that outward beauty is essential to a person's value. God does not say that. Or hating yourself because you're not more important in your workplace means that you're insisting that career success is essential to a person's value. God doesn't say that. So you and I don't have a right to say that. Humility means that we give up those standards. We give up our insistence on those standards in light of what God actually does say. So the last thing I'll say, just as we sort of think biblically, because I want to make sure I'm saving enough time for us to interact about anything this morning from this session or last. Insecurity is not just sin, it's also suffering. I do want to acknowledge that, okay? Because so far the way you've heard me talk about it, is you need to be humble and put down these standards by which you're measuring yourself in preference for God's love and what God says about you. And insofar as you don't do that, I think that is sinful, okay? I think that's a displacement of God. But I want to here recognize that it's not just sin, it's also suffering. A fuller perspective here recognizes that insecurity as a sinful response is conditioned by outside factors. And I just want to recognize to you that some of the most insecure people that I care for in my counseling ministry are from really, really difficult backgrounds. Some of them were abused. Some of them were even harmed sexually or physically in their childhood. Some of them were raised in an environment that was hypercritical of them. And so they just really struggle to find security, and they struggle to not hate themselves. I'm putting this point in here because I want it to be clear. Yes, I think these same truths apply to you, and God will be a gracious help to you in caring about what He says more than what everybody else says. But I also want to recognize the suffering aspect of this, that in God's mysterious providence, it's that Ecclesiastes world principle I talked about from the last. We live in a broken world, and that world has real effects on us. And so I would just encourage anyone, if that's kind of part of the story as to why you feel maybe a deep self-hatred, if some of those difficult situations are part of your story, I'd encourage you, go to a trusted person and just express that to them and let them pray with you and love you and help you. And if you need to be routed to counseling or something like that, your pastors can help you, sort of route you there. I can help them think it through. My point to you is this. For some of you, it may be a crippling reality that feels like you'd be opening up a whole can, okay? And what I would just say to you is, God will be kind to you in that. And that's a real suffering that God wants to love and care for you through. In other words, what you were told to think about yourself through all those wrongful, harmful things done to you is not what's most true, okay? What's most true is what God says, and He loves you, and you need people in your life that are going to tell you the truth rather than reinforce the lies that were forced on you, okay? So if you want, as we end here, living by faith when experiencing self-hate. Again, this third point is my attempt to just provide for you just a nice little practical framework if you are interested in thinking this through for yourself. You can read through that yourself, but let me highlight one thing that I actually want to be where I close, okay? You'll notice as you read through those points, the second one. Humility. I'm sorry, the first point that leads to the second point. The opposite of self-hatred is not self-love, but humility. And then the rest of the points unpack that. But let me just explain what I mean by that so that if you do want to use this method to just think through things in your own life, it'll be, hopefully familiar and helpful to you. The world says in various ways, like, hey, if you want to stop hating yourself, you have to learn to love yourself, okay? I don't think that's super good biblical theology, right? Because self-love actually can be a source of great sin. It can be a spring of sin. So by the way, that's why I'm saying the opposite of self-hate is not self-love. The opposite of self-hate is humility. Let me explain what I mean by that. Humility, as we read specifically in James chapter 4, again, it's in your sheet, but humility, especially there, is the willingness to set aside the desires I have about my ideal self in preference for what God has arranged and what God has given me. If you can learn to do that, and by the way, it's not going to be a singular decision and all of a sudden, whoa, this is awesome, I'm free. It's going to be a perpetual daily struggle. It's going to be a lifelong trajectory of laying down what I think I ought to have been, what I should be, how I should look, how much I should earn, whatever it is. As you learn to, in humility, recognize that God's wisdom for your life is superior to your wisdom for your life, you will experience freedom from self-hate, insofar as you do that. So humility means I don't demand what God hasn't given me, and I trust exactly how He's arranged me to be, to the smallest of details. So that's what I mean by that. I hope that's a helpful strategy to you, okay? So I'm going to pray briefly just to kind of transition to, I think we got about 10 minutes, and I want to see if you have any questions or any practical things I can help you think through regarding either one of the talks, okay? So let me ask God, and you can gather your questions as we do. Father, thank you for this morning, Lord. Thank you so much for your children here gathered in this room, Lord, that love one another. They love you. And I pray, Father, that you would help them know your love for them in new and unique ways that apply specifically, Lord, to the troubles that they face. In Jesus' name, amen.